They hailed him father to a line of kings. Upon my head, they placed a fruitless crown, placed a barren scepter in my gripe, thence to be wrenched with an unlineal hand. No son of mine succeeding. If it be so, for Banquo's issue have I fouled my mind. For them, the gracious Duncan, have I murdered, put rancors in the vessel of my peace. Only for them and mine eternal joy, given to the common enemy of man, to make them kings, the seat of Banquo Kent.
When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain?
I've been doing theater really my whole life. I feel I can't remember when I wasn't doing theater. My first professional play was when I was 16 years old, and it was Richard II, and I fell in love with Shakespeare. And ever since, I've really just been quite obsessed with the language of Shakespeare, and Macbeth in particular.
All our service, and every point twice done, and then done double. We're poor in single business.
I have my PhD in Shakespearean literature, Shakespearean and Marlowean verse acting from the University of Birmingham Shakespeare Institute in England. So I feel like that journey all the way to UNC Pembroke is quite a long journey, quite an interesting journey.
What? Will this line stretch out to the crack of doom? Another yet? A seventh? I'll see no more.
But what I find here, now, at this moment, is this incredible opportunity to work at this university, directing this play, Macbeth in particular, that speaks so deeply to our moment. It speaks so deeply to our cultural significance, what's happening culturally and politically, the division that's happening in our country, the pandemic that's happening in our country. The play opens with
Fair is foul and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and filthy air.
Shakespeare was very keen into this sense of pandemic and sickness, underlying disease, underlying political disease, cultural disease. So the sense of othering, the sense of division that happens throughout the play, which is the center of the play, which is this root of ambition that Macbeth feels and Lady Macbeth feels that makes them behave in certain ways that create evil. And this manifestation of magic and the occult and witches is really a metaphor on the sickness of the culture and the sickness of division in the culture. And the real sin of pride and ambition that Macbeth feels that makes him engage with such horrible choices to usurp and keep power. So power structures are at the heart of it. But what I love is the healing nature of the play with the character of Malcolm.
Hail, King of Scotland! Hail, King of Scotland!
Who I am sort of staging as a sort of messiah.
We shall not spend a large expensive time before we reckon with your several loves.
This messianic cessation of time where he can come and heal the nation and bring it together. And so that we have that kind of power with Shakespeare, that he puts such contrasting forces of good and evil together, and good wins out. And so I feel like the play is very hopeful, and that's what I like about it the most.
So when the pandemic struck UNCP in spring, we did our last live performance here in March. We had to subsequently cancel some other performances, and so there was a lot of uncertainty about what we would do next, how we would reopen, and what we would present on stage. With each passing day, it seemed like nothing was improving with the pandemic. that we were going to have to come up with some alternative ideas for how we would move forward, it became evident that virtual performances were the way to go. But I thought it was also an opportunity for us to engage some innovation. And I think one of the benefits that has, if you could call it a benefit, that has come from the pandemic is that it's really taken innovation off the sidelines. And all the technology we've had to do things, we're now capable of doing, and we must do if we're going to be able to survive. But now this is the only opportunity we have to present something is virtually.
Macbeth is the most mighty warrior in Scotland, a very noble man, very well respected, but he finds himself struggling internally with power to be the king of Scotland. That's ultimately what he wants. And when these three witches give him these prophecies telling him, that he will ultimately be king.
All hail, Macbeth, thou shalt be king hereafter.
And eventually, he goes down that path of doing whatever it takes to become king, no matter what it takes, killing, whatever. And he ultimately goes down that path, and we see this hero at the beginning of the play tragically fall because of his selfish ambition to gain power. I want to be powerful. I want to be respected by many, but am I willing to go to certain limits to get that power? Because Macbeth, in this play, Macbeth does a lot of bad things to get where he's at, and he ultimately gets what he wants. But if you see the play, it ultimately ends up going bad for him. But I really relate with the power conflict in your head constantly of what does it take to get there? What am I willing to do to gain this power?
From Lady Macbeth's perspective, I approach the play as more so a dance. So it's kind of about little strides towards making everything happen for yourself. And so it's these strides in the right direction and these strides for what you want. And sometimes what you want comes at brutal cost. And if you're not prepared for those costs, I feel like that's the issue with Lady Macbeth, is that in her mind, she said she was prepared for this, that she knew that she was supposed to do it, and then everything that comes afterwards, she wasn't prepared for. So Macbeth takes on this really dark energy that she didn't like, and in the beginning, that's her whole argument, is like what that was totally, like what you want the most and who you are, the goodness of your core, always contradict.
Malcolm is definitely like the hero of the piece, I guess. Like, he comes in at the end, he leads the army that eventually beats Macbeth. Macduff, he recruits Macduff. Macduff slays Macbeth, and he's really smart. He's really intelligent, and I like characters like that.
Yes, my poor country shall have more vices than it had before, more suffer in more sundry ways than ever, by him who shall succeed.
And I feel like he has such a self-discipline and control. Like, his ambitions to do what he's meant to do in life overcomes any temptations or evils that might come in his life. And that's a really respectable quality, in my opinion, of self-discipline. And
early on in the play, him and Banquo are their best friends. They've gone through many battles together, and ultimately, he's afraid of Banquo because Banquo is this noble man, way more noble than Macbeth, and you could also argue that Banquo is more rightful to be a leader or the king of the country than Macbeth. Macbeth is so stuck on having this power that he ends up killing his best friend just to ensure that he's safe. But ultimately, when you commit acts like that, it's going to come back to haunt you, no matter what. In the banquet scene, Macbeth is hosting this party for all his friends. This is sort of like the celebration dinner. But when he sees the ghost of Banquo, it's coming back to haunt him. You could argue that it's an internal thing. It could be a spiritual thing for sure. But like I said earlier, what he did, it was such a horrible act to kill your own best friend. In that moment, it's haunting him, and you can see it all over him. I feel like this is one of the breaking points for him, where he goes mad, or Macbeth goes mad ultimately. And that scene right there, it's really fun as an actor to do it because you have to let it all out. You know, your emotions are all over the table. You see something before you that no one else sees, and it's just really fun, ultimately, is all I can say about it.
Well, I'm not really in like most of the fight scenes, but I know like especially at the banquet, for me it seems like it's a lot easier to rehearse like whenever everyone's on stage because we all just kind of play off of each other really well. Like if something little changes, we just know to pick up like where we left off.
This is probably my first real acting experience outside of high school theater, which is nothing compared to this. But it was definitely like interesting to see, I guess, how strenuous it is with an actual like real sword and going through these scenes, especially with a different change he made recently where he had us go lower for one of the fight scenes. That was especially tough at first, but I'm getting used to it now.
I think it was only 2 days of auditions where we just were told to pick a monologue, any 10 lines, and know them pretty well, and then we did them out there.
Scarf up the tender eye of pitiful day, and with thy bloody and invisible hand, cancel and tear to pieces that great bond.
One said, God bless us, and amen to the other. As I listened to the fear,
My noble partner, you greet with present grace, and great prediction of noble having and of royal hope.
Today is going to be the first rehearsal. And the first rehearsal is always the most important rehearsal because the director has the task of communicating the importance of the project to the cast. There's an othering of people in this play. That's the true evil, is othering and thinking I alone am supreme.
You know, one of the biggest things, of course, about doing this work during a pandemic, it has an effect on everything, obviously. It has an effect on rehearsals. They haven't been rehearsing inside. They've been rehearsing outdoors the entire time, for example, maintaining the space and whatnot. For me, it's slightly different. I can't do my work outside. All my work has to happen in here, and I can't do it by myself. I have to have a crew. Typically, I work with a crew of usually between 6 to 10 people on any given day. And those are my students in my stagecraft classes and in my lighting classes. But during this particular period of time, this room, as large as it seems to be, is capped at 5 students plus myself. So that you cut my workforce basically in 1/2, close to 1/3 on a given day. And so now I'm trying to figure out how do I accomplish the work of 10 people with only 4 people? How do I have to restructure my day? How far ahead? So we've been working way, way ahead on this show. But I think in another way that plays directly into the show in certain ways. I think that all the trials and tribulations that we have been going through since March, they're all right there in the play. The same tone is going on. This switch in leadership from the previous king to the new king has brought with it calamity and distress, and the land has sickened, and the people are in turmoil. There is growing, increasing violence, and these things going on. And I think a lot of the play is some of the characters figuring out, how do we stay safe? How do we keep ourselves safe from what's raging around us in terms of the plague is going on and there's violence in the streets and people are at each other's throats and there seems to be very little community going on any longer. And this is the thing that keeps Shakespeare vital, you know, is that he wrote such absolutely timeless pieces that they continue to resonate and they continue to have meaning. And we still, day in, day out, we look at these things and we say, oh, well, look at this. It's the exact same thing that's still happening now. 400 years, how far have we come? Obviously, not far enough.
Like most playwrights, they do their plays based off of, you know, certain problems, certain conflicts, and things of that nature. And it can only be used for those certain things. Like, For instance, fences. Fences is a very serious play. You can't try to make fences a comedy. No, it's a serious. With Shakespeare, his works, you can do literally anything you want with them. Like, he leaves that door open for your mind to literally imaginate whatever you want with his plays.
Noble having in a royal hope that he seems wrapped withal. To me, you speak not. If you can look into the seas of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak then to me who neither begs, nor fears, nor favors, nor your hate.
We really wanted to play tribute and homage to the medieval time period, but also still make it very modern and throw in the ideas of this pandemic and apocalyptic and the world we're currently living in and the political aspect of it. And so taking all that in consideration, it's kind of a medieval modern mashup with hints of post-apocalyptic, and the color palette is very much red, white, and blue to represent the American society that we live in. I also wanted to play into the power dynamic between Duncan and Macbeth, and having Macbeth's side of the reign be very much like the Reds, and having Duncan's be more in the blue, kind of similar to our political parties now. So this is an example costume for Lady Macbeth in the coronation scene where Macbeth becomes king. And so what I really wanted to do is kind of make it feel fancy, but not over the top extreme. So it's just a simple velvet gown, and then to add in a little bit of visual interest, adding like a leather belt. It's gonna make it feel a little bit more medieval, but also a little more like in a time of war and pandemic. And I'm also gonna add in some trim that's gonna go on here. It's gonna feel like more like zippers. It's gonna give it a little more visual interest and feel a little more hardcore, less pretty. This is Duncan, the king, when we first start. So I want to, again, do something that felt very royal and regal, but then also create this interest of this asymmetrical line, which is something that's very modern. Again, playing with the color palette of blues, but I want to throw in this pop of red here to kind of tie it all together so it wasn't just red, white, and blue, but there's a culmination and a fluid motion between all the colors. I think the most out there thing for me is this idea of Macbeth's crown. And so we're taking this like kind of traditional crown and actually adding in like the coronavirus spikes into it, symbolizing this idea of like this virus entering society. And again, that ties into like the modernist take on it too. I like that this kind of gave the same similar feeling. So it's a spiky spoke and then a bulbous thing on top, which is very reminiscent of that virus.
For the physical set, we wanted to create a world that looked like it had been, if not necessarily destroyed, certainly roughed up more than the current world is. And so I'm trying to create an environment that looks like a world where things have started to break down, fall apart, maintenance is no longer kept in, to create that sort of bleak environment that things can go to if things go wrong for too long. Dr. Dreyos has stage combat training, and so for his shows, he takes care of the stage combat himself, which makes sense because then we're not trying to reinterpret. He doesn't have to explain to me, I want this, and then I'm trying to figure out what he's thinking about and then create it on stage. He can go straight from his mind to the actor, and it's certainly the better way to do it.
You see a spot like this on the floor, you think you stand in the middle of it and you're in it. But the actual truth of the matter is that the front light is down in here. Right? Because this is where it's hitting the floor, but to be lit, I need to get to here. And I can tell that without looking around because I can feel the light. I can just feel it, right?
When we spoke about the witches and how we wanted them to move, I decided to make them diseased themselves, as if the witches were going and permeating the stage with infection. And so the movements were very awkward and twisted so that they were to resemble a twisted, deformed cell that was diseased itself.
You're going to go into a second plie, and then you're going to turn parallel and twist. Yes! Yeah!
7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8.
I love working with the kids, and it's such a diverse group, and they all bring something new to the table, and a lot of times they can give me ideas, different iterations of what we should be doing. If I see someone who has a little different take on something, sometimes I use that and go, oh, let's use that movement or whatever.
I want to document the play as if there were an audience. In terms of the acting, in terms of the conceptualization, in terms of making theater, I think it's important that I'm directing the play with the actors as if we were doing it for an audience. That means we're not doing subtle film acting necessarily. We're doing stage acting of Shakespeare. It's on the GPAC stage. There's an audience here in the house that doesn't exist. Now that's very strange for an actor, because an actor needs an audience. But in essence, the camera is going to be the audience. The camera really is all of the people sitting in these seats. And so the challenge is that we don't have live feedback for the actors. They don't get laughs, they don't get gasps.
Some of the struggles I've had to face during this play, starting with the masks, is it's just a struggle itself, because you have a barrier right there. When you're trying to let out all this breath, it's just coming right back at you, and it's kind of like confining you a little bit.
Then on the torch of the mind to lie in restless ecstasy!
As well as trying to be respectful of others and keeping your mask on. When you're letting out all this emotion and speaking, it constantly comes off, so that in itself is a struggle. The first half of this process, we were out in front of GPAC rehearsing, and so dealing with the elements, the heat, sometimes it would rain and practice would get canceled.
There's so much external noise. There's cars driving by, there's people honking, there's people's music. There wasn't much respect for what we were doing, and so we had to really push ourselves further when we were outside to overcompensate for the noise pollution that was going on around us.
Also, another struggle for me very early in the process was I suffered an injury. Like the second week, I had a calf strain and dealt with that for a few weeks and then re-injured it. So I was hobbling along for a while there. It's a blessing to have Dr. Drez. He's helped me so much and guided me through this process, and he's hard on me, but I wouldn't want it any other way, because I ultimately want to get better. That's what the goal is here, and I want to help make his vision be seen in others the way he wants it to be seen. And so it's been a great process with him.
I'm very hard on the actors. I'm very hard on my students. I create a rigorous environment. I demand that they bring their full potential to the process, but I know that my teachers were always very hard on me when I was their age.
This is so dramatic, that sort of the clashing and the drop of the sword.
And now I look back on it and I thank the teachers for being hard on me, for demanding excellence from me, because it really gave me a respect for the craft and for the discipline of theater, which is not easy to do. It's not fun and games. It's a lot of work.
He knows what potential is, and he knows what can be. And he's good at molding and shaping out what can be.
So what we want is the imagery of these horses. After the debris field with the hawk, the debris killing and disappearing the hawk, and then we want a sort of deluge of horses.
Beauteous and swift, the minions of their race turned wild in nature, broke their stalls, flung out, contending against obedience as they would make war with mankind.
This play has been a huge journey, and at times it hasn't always been clear what it can be or what will be. But now we're getting closer and closer and closer, and you can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Once you're on stage and you're in the space and you feel the air, you're out of the driver's seat. That's basically what happens. So it's like the text is just flowing, awaken something inside of me, and that part of my soul that's awakened is what's her, and I can only be that when I'm her.
You know, me, I have this thing where like if I'm away from the stage or like if I'm away from like the craft, if I'm not acting, doing something for a long time, like I start to get like this, like I start to feel like I have like this burst of adrenaline like just caged in me that I gotta let out. That fact alone like just makes me like excited. So I'm just happy to, you know, really just be a part of the process.
Even without an audience, we're still putting on a show. I'm still doing what I love in theater and things like that. And I'm still pushing myself, and so are we all.
I'm really looking forward to the way this process is going. I love the way it's starting off right now. I can't wait to see how everybody, you know, especially the actors that you can tell that are shy during the rehearsal processes. I can't wait to see how they'll blossom and bloom by the end of this process. Being able to see them in their characters and then being pushed out of their comfort zone to have to play that character. I'm ready to see how that'll change and impact them in their everyday life. I'm really excited for that.
I think on every level, whether you're participating in it on the stage, whether you're behind the scenes doing costumes, whether you're a marketing intern with GPAC that's really working to promote that, you have some sense of ownership over that. This shared arts experience can change and shape your view of your culture and your community and where you come from, and really help to guide the rest of your educational foundation.
Here at UNC Pembroke, we are incredibly diverse campus, wonderfully diverse campus, and we're blessed with that. But my goal as chancellor here is how do we take that diversity and create inclusion? I read a quote by a gentleman who was responsible for helping to desegregate North Carolina schools many decades ago. And he made the point that desegregation is something that you can make a law. You can say you must do this, you must desegregate. But integration is more subtle. Integration involves changing people's hearts, changing their minds, changing their very soul of how they look at another person. That's more difficult. And to me, that is where we need to go with the conversation that we're having in America around racial justice right now.
Everything that's going on right now, you know, with the civil movement that's going on, the whole pandemic, and then the whole political standpoint that's going on, it all represents a lot. It shows how chaotic the world is right now. But at some point in time, you know, at the end of the play, there's a sign of relief that things are going to get better. There's hope. And that's just how I feel. I feel like at some point in time, there's going to be hope that things will not go back to how it was, but it'll be better.
We sit here at UNC Pembroke. It's the most diverse campus in 2020 in the Southeast. One of the most diverse campuses in the United States, where black, white, brown, every color coexists with love and tolerance. And that's what's important, and I think ultimately that's the meaning of the project, is to see how we can bring people together in a way that's positive and progressive.
Because people don't want this change. They want to stick to the tradition of like however the play was, keep it this way, and I feel like that's a bad mindset to have.
Absolutely.
And I feel like it's why diversity is important, because any actor you bring in, they can put their own piece into it, and like that's what I'm enjoying about this Macbeth thing, is we're not just like, oh, let's recount the story of Macbeth. We're putting our own our own spin on it, and that's what makes it important.
No one has ever done this version of Macbeth than how we're doing now, because we're actually talking about, we're getting real now. We're getting all personal. And I know sometimes it can get, you know, like how I was saying earlier, truth when it's revealed, it's uncomfortable. It's like, you know, because I was hiding for so long. I was hiding that, and I think that's what America was doing, is like that they've been hiding this kind of thing. I really hope that they can see this and relate it to our society and say, wow, our society is so messed up, that there is destruction, that there is fighting, that they need to, that there is, like, they stiffen the sinews and summon up the blood and all that crap that we yell in the beginning of in the opening of the show.
It's very important that we're doing this now,
because it's so fresh off of quarantine. That's that's where I was most excited about, especially when he was talking about like the concepts on that very first day when we were all talking.
Oh yeah, that
because
was
we
good.
were so like that was my first day seeing people since quarantine really, because we were all locked up. We were all, that's something to my knowledge we've never really done before as a society. No. And us to be thrown back into school and doing a show, like, I can't put it into words, but it's an interesting topic.
Without fail, our students appreciated the fact that we made a sincere attempt to return to campus, to have a face-to-face experience. They wanted to stay, they were willing to comply, they were willing to sacrifice whatever it would take to keep us here. I mean, this university doesn't, I'm sorry, it doesn't exist for me, it doesn't exist for leadership, it doesn't exist for faculty, staff. This university exists to educate students. And if we keep that as our focus, and we realize the population of students that we're educating, the ones who are the most vulnerable during this time, and the ones who stand to benefit the most after this time, that helps, to me, that is a great unifying vision.
Finding a way to do a show in a responsible way, I think, has allowed them to continue their education and give them an experience that they wouldn't have had otherwise. As for the recording of it, certainly this is something that we rarely get to do, mostly because it's illegal for most shows. Anything that's under copyright, we can't make recordings of. And so the advantage to doing Shakespeare is it's public domain, and videotaping it is allowed. And this gives them something that they can look back on in 20, 30 years and remember not just the bad part, oh, we were doing this with COVID with masks on, but hey, this is something I did with a group of people. It was a moment in my life that is temporary. All theater is temporary. It's for one show. And then when it's over, it's gone. And yes, you have a program to remember it by, you have a poster people sign, but to have a video to watch, to remember it, to show your family, to show your friends who couldn't come to the actual production, which for some of these students, their family's too far away. There's no way for them to get here. It gives them an opportunity that they normally don't have.
It's going to be really interesting to see how this final production takes off. I really want to be able to, you know, since this is like my last production here on campus, I want to be able to pass the torch to somebody, pass like my energy, the way I act in the process of how I get to the way I need to be for my role and for the production itself. I want to pass that torch off to somebody that's still going to be here, so that, you know, Drehos has more leaders in the department.
The thing that I love about what the students are doing is they're showing up every day. Even the ones who are playing very small parts, they show up every day. They do their parts to the best of their abilities, and they listen to the direction and they try to get better. They're trying to improve constantly. The thing that I've noticed is that they support each other more than I ever thought possible with students. And I think it's the university itself, the types of students that we get. There's a unique respect for each other. It's like, hey, you got this. Hey, you can do it. Get it done, you know? And love for each other that I find really humbling and extraordinary. I must say that I would rather not be wearing a mask. I would rather do the play with a different concept. But in some ways, I feel that doing the play now heightens Shakespeare even further and allows us to see this play in a way that it has never been seen before, which I think is an enormous privilege to be able to be a part of that.